Okay, welcome to this final PowerPoint on AC 3.2. The AC is on describing the contribution of agencies to achieving social control. And in this final one of three, I'm going to look at institutional tactics for achieving social control and then go on to look at gaps in the state provision. So institutions use a variety of methods to reduce deviant behaviour and achieve social control. We've seen previously that institutions such as prisons and young offenders institutions, for example, use token economies to try and encourage desirable behaviours among inmates. And obviously institutions come in many different shapes and sizes. Families, schools, workplaces, religious organisations, armies, prisons, they're all institutions. And most have rules about how their members must behave, along with punishments for breaking them and rewards for conforming. If we go back in time to Victorian school rules, you can see over here some very different attitudes to discipline in the classroom compared to where we might be in 2022. So let's start by looking at the criminal justice institutions and how they operate. So if we're looking at the courts, well, obviously, how do they bring about social control? Well, they can sentence offenders to various punishments, imprisonment, fines, discharges, community service orders. And this can achieve both individual and general deterrence. So punishment can put the convicted offender off repeating the crime and also serve as a lesson to the public in general. So we're going back and looking at our aims of punishment there and tying it all in. At the same time, they can give a community order, which requires offenders to rehabilitate, so for example undergoing drug addiction treatment. And the aim here is obviously to enable the offender to change their problem behaviour patterns. So there are some of the institutional tactics that are open to the courts. If we look at the probation service, well, we know that they supervise and monitor the behaviour of offenders, whether they're doing a community service sentence or whether they've been released from prison on licence parole. If the offender fails to meet the requirements of their licence, they can be returned to prison or to court for resentencing. We know this, we've covered this under the probation service when we looked at it. But you can see here from this stat here why people are recalled to prison: 8% for drugs or alcohol, 22% for failing to reside in the place they were told to, 30% for failing to keep in touch, 47% not complying with the terms of their licence, and 44% reoffending. So that's the probation service. The prison service, we've touched on this with IEPs and token economies, but the prison service does have a set of rules that apply to all prisons, and a prison governor can also add further local rules for their prison. But the rules that apply to all prisons cover the following offences, so I'll take you through those. So offending, threatening or hurting someone is breaking the rules. Preventing staff from performing their job is breaking the rules, as is escaping, using drugs or alcohol, damaging the prison, being in possession of forbidden items, e.g. a knife or a mobile phone, being somewhere in the prison that shouldn't be, and not doing as staff tell you. So those are the prison rules that are there. Those are the institutional tactics that the prison system employ. However, what can happen as a result of that? Well, breaking the rules can lead to a range of punishments, and these could include a caution, loss of earned privileges, being confined to your cell, sometimes called solitary confinement, or being prevented from working or from receiving money earned from working if you've got a job within the prison. All those punishments are time limited. So for instance, if you are placed in solitary, you can only be placed in solitary for a maximum of 35 days as an offence, as a punishment for an offence. And if you commit a more serious offence, you can get extra days put on your sentence, up to 42 extra days added to a prisoner's sentence. Obviously, if you try and escape, that can also mean you move to a higher security prison. So if you're in a Cat C and you try and escape, you're likely to move to a Cat A. And that then leads us on to this concept of phased discipline. Now, what do I mean by phased discipline? Well, this is another tactic that's used by most of the institutions within the criminal justice system. And this is basically the idea that for a first offence, so the first stage of offence, whether in prison or in the wider society, you tend to deal with first offences more leniently. So you'd get things like loss of privileges for a few days if you're a prisoner for a first offence, a warning, you sometimes get a police caution or a conditional discharge. And that is designed to stop you offending again. So if you do offend again, your repeat offence, particularly if it's more serious, is likely to be met with a stronger sanction. So we start off softly and we get harder. So our discipline is phased. The more crime you commit, the more the punishments come. And here's an example of, I dug this up from the internet, Levi Belfield, who was the killer of Millie Dowler. This paper reports that he's been stripped of his right to watch television and wear his own clothes after getting involved in a fight with 2 inmates. So there you see the example of the sort of sanctions that are given out in a prison in today's society, and phased as well. That then leads us on to gaps in the state provision. So this is all about the idea that, well, we've got agencies, we've got these agencies of social control, we've got the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, courts, prisons, probation service, etc. They all achieve some degree of control over criminal antisocial behaviour, but it's never complete. And there are reasons for this. And one of the chief reasons for this is resources. Because all these state agencies of social control are funded through our taxes. And there's a limit to how much taxpayers are willing to pay for these agencies. And of course, government is facing competing demands for resources from other sectors such as the National Health Service, education, pensions, welfare, local authority, defence, whatever. I dug this pie chart out, and this is the budgeted public sector expenditure on services in the UK for the 2021-22 year. And you can see this is in terms of the number here is billions. So education is going to get 124 billion, health 230. Social protection is not anything to do with crime and punishment. That is more about pensions and that sort of thing. Where we come with crime and punishment is actually public order and safety, and you can see they receive £41 billion overall. That's police, prisons, the whole lot. So you can see where things are. You can decide whether you think that's a fair split up, but that is the reality. Everyone's competing and only a certain amount of the pie can be given to all of the different competing agencies. So resources are limited. And we can illustrate that by looking at budget cuts. So since the financial crisis of 2008, government spending cuts and reorganisations have had a huge impact on state agencies. And it's definitely reduced their effectiveness in maintaining social control. Now, it's really important for the exam that you have some examples and some stats that you can quote to back up any evaluation you're making. Now, we will look at some of these in more detail in the next 2 PowerPoints, but just to give you an idea, have a look at this. Between 2010 and 2018, the police budget was cut by 19%. Which led to a fall of 20,000 police numbers. So how is that going to affect social control with 20,000 less police people on the streets? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? The CPS budget was cut by 25,000 and the organisation lost 1/3 of its staff. How is that going to impact on social control? Well, it's people taking more time to get through the court system, longer on remand, etc., etc., etc. And then if we look at the prison budget, that fell by 16%, staff levels by 15%, but over the same time, the prison population doubled. And we wonder why our prison system is broken. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to work that one out, does it? He says, making a political point. So, as well as resources, other things that are barriers to social control, gaps in the state provision, is new technology. So new technology can help, but at the same time it can hinder. So actually, new technology places an extra burden, particularly on criminal investigations. In 2018, the head of the CPS said that the criminal justice system was unable to cope with the huge amounts of data generated by technology. And this is what she said. She said, one recent rape case where they met on Tinder took 600 police hours to go through the digital material. You can have a judge say, I want a download of that iPad, and it will take 15 officers working all weekend to get it. If you think about the capacity of mobile phones and iPads, you're using that as evidence to just get that evidence off. It's a massive amount of time and manpower, womanpower. So as I mentioned, problems checking mobile phones for evidence, because there's so much on there, has actually led to failures to disclose evidence. Evidence has been missed, and particularly that's led to a fall in the number of rape and sexual offence charges. And at the same time, the cost of new technology, such as DNA profiling, also poses a limitation to the police's ability to investigate offences, because every time they send DNA off to the lab for processing, it costs them money, and they have a limited budget. That then leads us on to another gap in the state provision, which is unreported crime. Because criminal agencies can only investigate, prosecute and convict offenders if the offence has been reported, and only about 40% of crimes are reported to the police, and different types of crime have different reporting rates. So, for example, only 1 in 4 rapes and attempted rapes are reported. An estimated 2 million domestic abuse cases occurred in 2018, but not all were reported to the police, and only 600,000 were recorded. White collar and corporate crime, as we know, often go unreported because people are unaware they've been victims of, say, fraud, overcharging or environmental pollution. So unreported crime is an issue, but at the same time, existing laws can create issues. What I mean by this, you can only achieve social control as long as the appropriate laws are in place to begin with. And what happens is, as time moves on, a new harm can emerge, but there's no existing law to forbid it. And if that's the case, state agencies can't bring a prosecution to control harmful behaviour because there's no law that legislates for it. Now, I did a bit of digging and looked at some of the new laws that have come in 2022. I've got an example of 2 of them, which look at how new technology and existing laws have had to be amended to make up for these gaps. So, for instance, you may not have realised this, but we had a new law that came in this country. All new properties built in England from 2022 onwards will need to have an electric vehicle charging point installed as standard. That is now a law, so that is to get ready for the rise in electronic vehicles, to future-proof us for that. If you don't have that law, you're stuffed. Now, that's not really to do with criminality, but the next example is. So, obviously, when I was a kid, we didn't have mobile phones. So driving with a mobile phone was not an issue, but laws have had to be brought in to deal with that. And as mobile phones have got more complex and Bluetooth has become installed in more cars, laws have had to change accordingly. So from 2022, all this came in. So laws will go further to ban drivers from using their mobile phones. So instead of just making a phone call, they've now upped it to no photos, no videos, no scrolling through playlists, no playing games. You see how they've had to add things on because they weren't legislated for beforehand. All that's while driving is already illegal, but even selecting a song can now land you with a £200 fine or 6 points. And that rule applies even if you're stopped at a red light. So you can still carry on using hands-free devices while driving, providing that hands-free device is in a secure cradle. So that is how the law has changed, to stop people, going, oh, I wasn't on my phone, I was, I was using it as a hands-free device, it was a map. Well, if it wasn't secured, then you were on your phone and you're going to get a fine and you're going to get some points. So that is how the law has changed. And existing laws need to change all the time to allow for new things coming in. Finally, this coming on with technology leads us on to this idea of social media. And there's been a lot of debate about the responsibilities of social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter and YouTube for offensive and harmful material that appears on them. For example, you know, this guy here, this Australian, wasn't Australia, I've forgotten his name, a right-wing terrorist, actually filmed himself killing 51 Muslims in a mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand in 2019. He live streamed the whole thing on social media. These are some of the clips from it. Not appropriate. And if such material was published in a traditional way, such as it was in a film or a book or a newspaper article, the publisher would be held criminally liable. However, social media companies claim they are not the publishers. And in the UK, they can't currently be prosecuted for material found on their sites, although that is about to change, because we have a new online safety bill that's currently going through Parliament as I speak, due probably to be made law sometime early in 2023. But here is the link that will take you to a guide to that, and it is definitely an improvement, and now social media companies are much more liable for the content that they allow to be put on their sites. So hopefully that's helped. You've got some idea as to how the various different agencies bring about or the tactics they use to affect some social change and also achieve social control. We'll be looking at more gaps in the state provision in the next two PowerPoints, our final two PowerPoints for Unit 4. And I'll see you for those. Take care. Goodbye.